Well, thanks for joining us for today's webinar titled, Are Your Field Officers' Custom Report Requests Driving You Crazy? This topic actually came from several of our customers who have or who were struggling with what we call the cycle of pain, where they were getting, especially advancement services, all these requests for, I need the list of people and my prospects in Houston who haven't been contacted or visited in the last year or more, who are current in the annual fund and have been to an event or something. And this is the kind of stuff that, as you see here, can be pushed out to the field officers so they can self-serve on it. And the results are quite dramatic, and we call that killing the cycle of pain, so that instead of these requests coming into a team that's jammed up with other stuff, the front line can answer these questions on their own. So that's what we're going to talk through today. I'm your host. I'm Doug Cogswell. I lead Advisor Solutions, so we're a business intelligence software and services company. We've been a spin-off from Bell Labs. We've been in the sector for a while. We've got a bunch of fundraising clients, and we've got a ton of expertise in data analytics, and I believe it's fair to say we're #1 in fundraising analytics today. So first, to put this in perspective, fundraising data, from the CRM systems and other sources, event attendance, newsletter click-throughs, all that, can be used for a variety of ways. And so we're going to be talking about leadership giving today. And the focus is going to be on easy access for field officers. We're also going to talk about some coaching tips and best practices for managing a portfolio. But I just wanted to say, the same data and the same tools can be used by senior management for campaign dashboards. And we've got clients who, a field officer will go to the dean of the law school and say, hey, you're doing pretty good. Tap, drill down. There's 6 campaign purposes. 3 are doing awesome. 3 are behind plan. Drill in on them. By the way, they're behind because you're getting organizations to contribute, but your alums are falling behind. So here's an area for focus. It's that kind of stuff. We're doing a ton of work in annual giving, looking at which appeals are working to acquire non-donors, what are the characteristics of the non-donors who are most easily acquired. Same thing with lapsed donors, and a lot of this is slicing and dicing lists. So you're coming into the end of the year, what's the 300 best people to give to the call center, all that kind of stuff. And the mainstay of kind of where we got started was in prospect research, where it's slicing and dicing lists, creating metrics, scoring for engagement and capacity, and trying to find how to get the pools the best staffed. And we also support at the bottom, more analytic types can build models and create new metrics and all of that. I just want to lay this out, the leadership giving and the spectrum of all the kinds of things that you can do with the data you most likely have on hand. So when we look at leadership giving, there's 2 very different pieces, and sometimes they get confused. And we have seen teams try to take tools that you would use to manage a pool of prospects and push it out to field officers. And that usually doesn't work so well because the field officers may not understand it. They may battle over the metrics. They might find it overwhelming and all of that. So I want to just lay each of these out separately. They're both valuable, but they really need to be treated differently. So first we're going to look at managing a pool, using metrics to uncover stories and finding best practices and coaching tips, which are shared and discussed openly with the team. And when this happens, it can be a wonderful thing, and we've seen performance and results improve dramatically. And then after we take a quick look at that, we're going to dive into what field officers want and will use, which is generally something very simple to plan trips and calls. They're trying to get lists, and they want to determine next steps. And much more than that usually overwhelms most of them, but not all of them. So let's dive into managing the pool. And first, there is a prior tutorial on this, which you can access, and this will come back up at the end at advisorsolutions.com, resources webinars, which will go into a lot more detail on what I'm going to talk about next. But when we do this work, there are 5 key metrics we work with major giving teams. And the data is usually there, to work with all of these. But the first one is prospect assignments, making sure that all of the highest capacity and most engaged prospects are staffed, and that the pools are reasonably sized across the team. We did a webinar back in May on how to appropriately size pools for major gift officers, and we built on a bunch of data from quite a few of our clients. So that's the first thing, making sure the right prospects are assigned. And then secondly is the penetration. Is there a pool of assigned prospects being connected with? And this is different than just measuring visits. So the concept with visits, and a lot of our clients start this way, is You know, in a fiscal year, how many visits has an officer made? You'd like to see 75 to 125 or whatever. But that could be gamed. We've seen a whole bunch of cases where, you know, you have 15 lunches with 3 of your best buddies and there's 45 of the fiscal year visits. We much prefer, that's a fine measure, but we much prefer to see a measure of penetration. Like if I have a pool of 125 prospects in a 12-month period, I should be able to have a visit and or a solicitation in-depth thing with half of them. And I should be able to connect by phone or by email or a visit with 80 to 90% of them. Some of the qualification ones I'm not going to get, but I should be able to get the most of my pool. And that's a better measure. And you want to have the discussions, not just about the ones who are being connected with, but also the ones who aren't. And that often is the richer discussion. Like if I'm only getting to half my pool, what's up with the other half? Are they not the right prospects? Or maybe I'm having trouble reaching cold calling in. And that's a rich discussion, and that's as valuable as it is to talk about the ones you just had to visit with. So this penetration measure sort of changes the dialogue around that. The third one is movement. So, and most of you have some number of prospect stages. We generally like 5 or so, like maybe qualification, early cultivation, mature cultivation, solicitation, and then close. And you want to see movement through the stages at a reasonable pace. You don't want to see one field officer with half of his qualification prospects in qualification for 12 to 18 months. Something's gone wrong there. Either the prospects aren't the right ones or the field officer's having challenges. And so you want to see balance across the stages and also movement within the stages. And the data can really help draw that out and have these discussions. And solicitation levels are asks at the right level relative to capacity and attachment. And I actually was at a conference a month or so ago, and there were like, I don't know, 50 people in the room. I asked the question, are any of you doing this? I mean, in the commercial world, pricing is really important. In the fundraising world, no hands went up. And the issue here is if I've got $1 million capacity prospect who is highly engaged, you know, my ask might be $500,000 for somebody like that. And if I ask $20,000, guess what? I'll get it closed, I'll have a good yield, but I've left $480,000 on the table. If, on the other hand, I've got $1 million prospect, capacity level, who is disconnected, hasn't been to events, you know, hasn't been to reunions, a $20,000 ask for that person might be a good one to get started, and that might be a tougher one to close. So it's really hard in our world, in our way of thinking, to think about measuring yield and some of these other things if you don't also measure what level am I soliciting at relative to the capacity and engagement or attachment of the prospects. When these things come together, we see higher revenue levels and, you know, good closes and all that. So the goal is to, in our world, use the data with management and field officers to have discussions. And what happens when this works well is you highlight the successes, and those successes become advocates. They become spokespeople for what can work, and they inspire the rest of them and raise them up. We've seen bad cases where metrics like this are pushed out to the field officers in a dashboard, and they freak out over them and start debating them, and they contest them and all this other stuff. And in our view, we're the data geeks here. we do a lot of work with data. We love dashboards. But that's, in general, a misuse of the metrics, and it doesn't create the same results as managing the pool as a team and having these really good discussions. We like to say these kinds of metrics and this kind of data drives the discussion, and the discussion is what's really valuable, and it's having people learn from each other and step up. And so, you know, I think the high level is, you know, I want to just point out in closing on this slide that it's not just activities. We see so many teams measuring fiscal visits this fiscal year to date, and in our view, it's much more than that, and the data has that. And if you can bring it out, it can have, you know, really good results. So using these things, and we sort of just talked about it, but it's stories and coaching tips. They uncover stories. You want to find the best practices, which is shared and discussed openly. It's not a good or a bad threshold. It's a part of a story that needs to be unpacked. You need reviews. We generally, you know, see development officer plans set annually. They can be more often, but that's a good time frame. They focus on pool strategies and strategic metrics. How am I going to move people along? How am I going to get these more aggressive solicitations out of these 3 key prospects? Group discussions. The team works to improve subpar performance. The leaders rally the ones who aren't doing as well. And there's reviewed formally at least 4 times a year. You know, I know some of you doing it every other month. More than that's probably overkill, but there's some frequency. And then there's always discussions of the data. The data is never perfect. Use what you've got, improve it over time. You know, the system, the metric or the mantra ought to be, and if the data is not in the system, it didn't happen. So it's not acceptable not to put the contacts in the system or not to put the solicitations in the system. They've got to go in. And then you can have the discussion. And it's a continual improvement model is what we're talking about here. And when this works, we see better balanced pools, more movement from early stage cultivation through to closing. Focus on higher value prospects. You know, ideally in the pool, there's some of the prospects who are going to produce more revenue than others. You want to make sure they are well covered. Tighter and more integrated teams actually creates a team dynamic that's better because there's open, there's sharing. You've got the leaders coaching the ones who are coming along. And it's, when we've seen this work well, it's been a really healthy, positive thing. More and faster closes because you're managing pace and you're getting help when something gets stuck at maybe mature cultivation or early solicitation or whatever. Higher solicitation levels. You know, we've got several clients who've talked about higher numbers of million-dollar donors because you're asking at a more aggressive level. And more revenue faster is sort of the bottom line, all good things. So now we're going to switch off of that. And as I said, that's really valuable. That's a lot of our work. We totally encourage everybody to look at these major giving pools more strategically like that. But also we would say it's really sometimes tough to push that out to the field officers in a dashboard. Those guys, and this is coming from focus groups with field officers, and it actually came off of one of our clients where the field officer project got overcomplicated with a bunch of metrics, and we heard at a trade show that it wasn't getting used, so we got a focus group going to figure out why, and it was about this. These field officers want lists. I mean, they're trying to plan the next trip. They need very simple filters: where the prospects live, how long since they've last been visited, how much are they worth, how attached or engaged are they, what stage are they in, and maybe donor giving status. Are they current in the annual fund, are they lapsed, or are they a non-donor? And we would say simplicity is key. Richness can overwhelm. And I don't think I can state this more clearly. And you're going to see as we go through one of these and come back to look at some usage examples, even with this, our experiences is going to be a third of the field officers who can have trouble with it and may not use it. And they may have trouble logging onto their laptop or turning the tablet on as well. But I mean, this is a world of people who are relational. They're great at that. They're not necessarily so good with the metrics and the computers and all of that. So the goal here with the field officers for self-service is give them something that's useful to them. And when we've done this, there's been huge uptake. It's been really, really impressive. So here's an example of what one looks like. This is it's an advisor dashboard. There are other forms of this. It doesn't have to be us. But this is comes from a portal, or you can launch it from wherever. If I launch it, I'm going to log in as Gretchen Meyer, and it comes up and it's loading data. It's filtering down. I'm Gretchen. It's going to filter to my pool, and in 10 to 20 seconds, I'm going to have this interactive dashboard where I can look at my pool and I can get a list out of it, and I can then go follow-up call or whatever I need to do with it. So we're up. We're logged in. We end up, with a couple of pages. There's a filters page, a map page, a prospect list page, and there's some text over here that describes what's here and what I can do with it. I'm going to hide that. So here's the filters. Time since last visit. So I'm Gretchen. I've got 233 prospects, which on our how many prospects to assign, this would be a newer major giving program or a high-end annual size pool. It's not a a mature major giving pool, but it's a good size for that. I've got how many months or how long since they've last been visited, 6 or less than 3 months, 19. I've got a whole lot of them. There's no contact record for a whole nother bunch that's over a year. And we're going to get this, we'll go into the contact records table, and we're counting whether I, Gretchen, made the call, or the dean made the call, or the president. If I've got somebody else making these visits, the prospect knows a visit's been made, that counts. So this is, prospects who have literally not been visited in over a year would be these 3 bars. That's one key thing that as we do research with field officers, they all want. The rating. this is 10 to 50 million capacity. This is down at the bottom. The lowest rating here is 25 to 50. We, just a word of caution, we have had clients who put in major gift likelihoods, it's a 689 score or plan, whatever, these scores, and field officers usually start debating them. And even this, we've had cases where just to get harmony and take out the dissent, we put in wealthy zip codes. So they live in the 100 wealthy zip codes, the next 200, the whatever, because that's indisputable. So actually, if you get in discussions about the rating scores, the wealthy zips may not be as accurate for capacity, but if nobody's going to dispute that the prospect lives in Darien, Connecticut, and probably has more wealth than somebody who lives, wherever that's not Darien, Connecticut. So there needs to be some capacity measure. What you use, I would caution, ought to be what is accurate and what people are comfortable with. And simpler is better. This form is pretty straightforward because it's got number ranges in dollars versus 629 versus 430 MGL scores. And we've got attachment. We do a lot of work in this area. We like to group them into 5 buckets. Owners, these are people who are all in. If you looked at the data, they would have been to all the reunions, given all of the last 5 years. They gave all of the 5 years before that. They've been to like a bunch of events. They played some sports. They've done everything. These people are owners. Highly engaged is the next level down. They may have missed some reunions, maybe missed a couple years of giving. And the disconnected, this is higher ed, have graduated and fled. I mean, they've been no reunions, no giving, no events, all of that. And when we do this work in setting this up, we create models based on people of equivalent capacity rating. What differentiates those people who give at those levels from people who don't? And it's a combination of activity participation, giving, reunions, sports, newsletter click-throughs, and it creates a score. And if you put the score in here, there's going to be a debate. But if you put these buckets in, we find this works really well. Most people can deal with, okay, I want the highly engaged owners. It has meaning to them a lot more than a score. So this is important. Then the prospect stage, what stage is qualification, cultivation, solicitation. And most of our clients have some research involvement in setting these things because the field officers, we've had some cases where they sort of randomly move them around. It's better if there's some validation, that there's some criteria that, yeah, this actually has left cultivation. There's been a meeting. We know there's some interest, so now they're in cultivation. Donor status, this is coming from the annual fund area. Are they current, lapsed, or non-donor? There's a list of everybody. So this is literally the key page. This is where I can cut the data all kinds of different ways. I've got a map. So here's my, Gretchen, here's my pool. Actually, I'll probably go back to management, like, what is this? I've got a bunch in the Northeast, the New York area. It looks like somebody's up here in Boston. I've got a few in the Midwest, a cluster around Chicago. Somebody looks like one out here in Kansas City. So I probably want to grab these two, and say, who are they? There's 3 of them, Nadine, Augustine, and Richard, and go back and say, can I get these reassigned because they're taking me away from my focus? And then there's a list. So here's a list of everybody. It's got relevant facts, the ID, the name, it's me. Total giving, type, surviving alum, whatever, rating, attachment, how much they've given this year to date, how much they gave last year, how much they gave the year before the last visit. July 4th, 15, I made it. Here's one where somebody else made it. Where they live, active ask amount. And this could have phone numbers, addresses or whatever is relevant to the field officer. So let's say I'm going up to Southern Connecticut. So I can sort of see I have a bunch of prospects up here. Looks like I got somebody up here and there. I've got somebody in Westport. I've got a bunch down here in Stamford. So I can, with the mouse, I can take this and sweep over and grab, so I got Southern Connecticut. And let's just drop in on them. I can go back to my filters page. So my Southern Connecticut part of the pool has 34 prospects. And I can see, one's been visited recently, 4. There's a whole group of them. It looks like there's 4 and 5. There's like this group haven't been visited in at least a year. I want to make sure I hit them up. There's 25 of them. Let's grab them. What do I know about them? Some are lapsed, some are current. They're all pretty high capacity. There's a group here that are pretty engaged. Let's grab them because they're the ones that are more likely to move along. Drop in on them. And Yeah, I've got a couple here that are further verbal commit. I've got 3 in solicitation, 2 in qualification. Yeah, I can substitute. What are the 2 in qualification? I don't think I even know who they are. Willie Zhu and Nicholas Lappner. Let's go to the prospect page. Yeah, it's a parent. I haven't given much. Given little bits the last few years. Yeah, this one's been visited back in time, a couple of years, coming on over a year. This one hasn't been visited. Got them. Let's go back a step here. What about the ones in solicitation? Yeah, there's 3 of them. Okay, I got my list. I actually want all of this group. So I'm going to take this group of 12. I'm going to go back to my list. I want to take this because I want to get this set up. I'm going to drop it out of here, working on a browser or my tablet or whatever. I want this out of here. I'm going to save it in Excel and open it. So I basically self-serve got a list of my prospects in the Southern Connecticut area who are engaged, highly engaged owners, and I explored them a little bit, and I grabbed a subset of them, and kind of here they are out in Excel ready to take action on. And in that process, I self-served. I was able to examine the group, come to some understanding of what it is, and get my own list out and then go do something with it without having to go back to advancement services or IT or anybody else for help. And that's the idea of this whole thing. And when we do that, this is actual results from one of our clients, Ithaca College. They were running, and this is an advisor histogram, this is the level of requests to advancement services they were running until they launched this front-end tool, and this is what happened afterwards. So the requests for these kinds of cuts of data, ad hoc reports, lists, dropped by like 80%. I mean, it's dramatic. And we have had other clients tell us this, like this literally takes the junk, I would call it the junk workload. There's not a lot of value in having an advancement services person or an IT person respond to requests the field officer can do on their own. And then what Ithaca did with this, they were able to give the time to major new initiatives had not been able to get to in the past. So the group became more strategic. They worked on development of a KPI tracking solution, a complete redesign of the gift receipt acknowledgments, a successful advance, which is their CRM system upgrade, and they created additional advisor dashboards on their own, which they published out to their team. And they loved. If you want to follow up, just my email will be at the end of this. I'm sure they'd love to talk in depth about how this worked and how they did it. But this is the kind of stuff we're seeing from our clients when you successfully empower the front line to do this kind of work. Now, the thing is, not all field officers will use it. So that what I showed was a kind of a simple approach to get at a handful of filters and cut a list. And in our experience, a third will not use it. And they just are not computer savvy. They can't understand a bar chart. They still debate the rating scheme or whatever. That's fine. Just be aware they can sit down with an AA or a researcher. Somebody else can help them through this. It's still easier without having to go back and do custom database cuts. But 2/3 will find this really helpful and use it. And we have seen this over and over again. Consistent, continual use by the front line. And then the other thing is, like, there's going to be maybe 20% of this who will want more. They will want some of the metrics that they hear about in their portfolio review meetings. They might want some more of the metrics that Prospect Research works with. They might want maybe employment information or other stuff. But just be aware, the people that want that are a small minority of the overall population. And if you're deploying one of these, the people in Prospect Research and the people in Advancement Services are completely comfortable with the richer content that some part of your field team will want. And if you go that way, you're going to disenfranchise like this whole, it's like 80% of the group won't use it. And we have seen that happen, which is why I've stated it multiple times in this session, but it's really important to get this kind of information in the density level, balancing simplicity on one side and richness on the other side that the team can actually handle, and make sure it addresses their needs and their questions. It's not forcing other things on them that they're not comfortable with or capable with. And again, just be aware, not everybody's going to use it. I've never seen that happen. So It's just the way it is. I'm a data guy. I wish it was different, but that's what we see. So just as in summary here, there's two very different things, but both are really valuable. The first thing we talked about is managing the pool, which is using the metrics to uncover stories and finding the best practices. And we love the word coaching tips. It's getting people to talk. It's getting the stories out. It's having the ones who are doing really well be heroes and rally up the others and be coaches and mentors. And it's shared and discussed openly with the team. But that's very different than what field officers will want and generally use. They want to plan trips and calls, get lists, and determine next steps. And when you get these things separated out and deployed, you get the kinds of benefits that Ithaca College had, where they 80% drop in the report requests, and the ability to then take the time that's freed up and do the stuff that really needs to get done that's much more strategic. So that's the message here. Got time for some questions. And as we move into questions, there's a chat box and questions on the bottom of the webinar panel where we'll get them and we'll answer them. And if we miss them live, we'll come back and we'll get them out to you after the webinar. But I also wanted to point out the other tutorials on this topic, which I sort of touched on briefly today, are up at our website, advisorsolutions.com, resources, webinars. There's no charge for these. Sort of our most widely viewed webinar ever is Key Metrics and Major Giving Fundraising, which is that talk about numbers of prospects, penetration levels, movement through stages, solicitation level, and yields. There's another one that's also had widespread viewing, which is how many prospects should be assigned to a major gift officer. And we have heard everything from 40 to 300, and what we tried to do there is create a framework. So for some programs, 200, 240, 220 is appropriate. Other programs, 60, 70 is appropriate. And then we talked about balancing through stages, and we try to tie it all together to revenue yield. And a lot of this is driven by the typical solicitation levels, the time to close, and all of that. So that's what that's about. And the last one on this sort of triumvirate is creating a culture of analytics. It's a great discussion with one of our clients, Wake Forest, where we talk about getting data out to the team so that they use it every day. And there's part of it is getting a dashboard like I showed you, and the bars could be lists. You could put pies in, but it's basically a set of simple filters, some kind of geographic layout. Maps work great, and a list. And once you get that, there's a bunch of stuff that this creating the culture talks about. One of which is question scrums, where you challenge the team to answer questions, and you maybe get them in a room, when they start using it, and say, here's a question, everybody come in and answer it, and they work together. And then you coaches, and there's stuff in the onboarding process for new hires, and there's maybe some wiki pages that link to out of that panel on the left of the dashboard. Then there's an intentional effort to cut off unproductive routes to information. So if Joe has always gone to Mary in advancement services to get the lists he wants, and Mary keeps doing that, Joe's not going to use the thing because Mary's giving him what he wants, and it's just pick up the phone and call Mary. But overall, after a little bit of maybe strain on Joe, it's going to be easier for Joe to get his own lists, and it's much better on Mary when all these requests stop coming in. So Wake and other of our clients will intentionally stop those routes and say, no, we don't do that anymore, but we do have a coach who will come with you and help you work with this new tool to get the list on your own. And the last point on this creating the culture is senior management advocacy, especially on these key metrics things. Like, you're not going to have discussions about, open discussions with the team about pool penetration and movement through stages if the VP or the AVP of development, major giving, is not on board with this. And when that happens, it's great. And if they're not on board, it's a challenge. And part of that is also as you get going with this, highlight the successes, especially senior management. If they highlight field officers who have stepped up because of the discussion that happened from the data, or because they had this self-service list tool and they raised more money, they got more stuff closed, if that gets highlighted and becomes part of the culture and part of the story, these kinds of tools get used a lot more. So 3 other tutorials that support what we've just talked about here. Now we're going to questions. What does owner stand for in the attachment section? Great question. I am going to answer that by actually going into another project. So bear with me a second. I'm going to drop out of this. I'm going to go to a browser. I'm going to bring up some demo site. I'm going to bring up a prospect identification project. So this is a project aimed at prospect research, and it's got the attachment scores and the detail behind it. So here's a page that looks maybe somewhat similar to the field officer, where it's got these attachment scores and disconnected and all the way up to owner. And then here's a page of raw attachment scores. So if I grab owners, let's just grab them. This is showing me, I'm going to rank from high to low, a score. So what happens here is there's a model algorithm that's got a bunch of math that ranks everybody from 0 to 1, and the highest, and this is 0.59. The webinar thing is in the way. Hold on. The bottom of this is I'm dealing with the webinar controls on top of my page. So these run down, it looks like, into the 0.2s. So there have been 0.27 to 0.6 as an owner. And the factors that make up the score in this particular example are how many volunteer committees they've been on in the last 10 years. So this person, sorry, I've got the webinar controls are floating over my, let's hide this thing. So this person, Rose, has been on 10 volunteer committees in the last 10 years. In the last 5 years, they made a gift in all 5 of them, and it could be a threshold of like spending in some like at least 20 bucks. They made gifts in the 5 years before that. They've been to 7 reunions, played 2 sports and 2 student activities. So that makes them an owner. If I go back over here, let's grab some detached people. So this is the group of 14,000 out of my pool who are detached. You know, their scores run from 0.1. They're going to drop down lower, down to 0.02 or something. So here's the top of the detached. Nicholas Watson. He's pretty well rated, but he's been on no volunteer committees. He's made gifts in 2 of the last 5 years, so he's not disconnected. He's made 3 years before that. He's been to some reunions, but no sports and student activities. And so the things that matter the most are these, and these matter least. So let's go grab the group that's disconnected. Grab them. They were from 0.02 down. So this guy's been on a volunteer committee, but no gifts, no reunions. And the bottom of this list is all going to be zeros. You can, like, there's nothing. So that's what's happening here. And the way we create these, let's go back to the owners. We know that there's a set of things that determine, they're an expression, they're an opt-in expression of interest. You want all of those, any form of data that is somebody expressing self-opt-in interest. And if you join a volunteer committee, that's one. You make a gift, you come to a reunion. This does not have alumni activities. I'm not sure why. Maybe this guy's data didn't have the data. You click on newsletters. All of those things matter. So in our sandbox, advisor sandbox, we will create these kinds of metrics out of the various tables in the CRM system, and they could be done in our world. They don't need to be done in the database. And then we use regression modeling, and we create what we call a base population, say of everybody who's rated at least $100,000, and then the target is everybody who's given at or above that level. And the modeling is trying to differentiate from these kinds of things what most influences, what has the highest lift on somebody actually making the gift. And it does a bunch of stuff and creates a complicated math formula which creates these scores. And it's basically logging and adding and giving points to all these things and figuring out that for this particular institution, this matters the most. And that formula then embeds, we call this a project, embeds in the project, and every day, usually once a day, we can do it more often. We reload the data, so the committees table changes, the gifts table changes, all these metrics get readjusted. The score gets recalculated, and the people then get rebinned. So it's possible that somebody else could become an owner tomorrow because they joined a committee, made a gift, and came to a reunion or whatever they might have done. And that's sort of the view of this. And then the last point is when we do this attachment or engagement stuff, I guess 2 last points. It is nuanced to an organization. So we did the same work at 2 elite private schools. One of them, reunions, was way on the left. And the reunion program is very mature. It creates a lot of bonding, a lot of buy-in, a lot of alums come back to it. And it was on the left. We did another elite, well-known private school, and reunions were like the fifth thing over because their reunion program is much less mature, has a lot less activities, fewer people come. And so we find that there's some general formulas out there, but they really do vary by institution. And the other thing is the piece that's typically missing is newsletter click-throughs. And you've got people like get your newsletter and they're clicking through and saying they're interested in your stuff. And if you get the data, it is influential on attachment, but it also helps you understand what interests they have because of what they're clicking on. So that's a bit on the need to nuance these. And last, we really like this format where you've got the detail here, but you're starting with something really simple, bar charts. Because back to the field officers, if they had this, most of them, they glass over. This works. I want the highly engaged owners. I select them, I've got them. There they are. There's 6,892 of them. If you're going deeper, you then want to see what the scores are. Why is this person an owner? Why is the person at the bottom of the list, less engaged? Drop to the bottom of the list. Here's why. And these people ought to be on committees if I want to get them to be owners. They're not, and there's like just a couple of committee participations. So that's the layout and the way you balance between kind of these high-level bins and then the lower-level detail that makes up the score is really important. So I may have overkilled that question, but great question. Clearly something we have a lot of passion about. And we do a lot of work in the area, and we'd love to have follow-on discussions and coach you, or if you want to use us, we're good at setting these things up and all that stuff. Is there a place screen that looks at next steps? Yeah, back to here. I'm going back, I'm jumping around. That's fine. Go back into the one we were looking with Gretchen. So this is a template. And the way we set something like this up is we know there's some things that are necessary. Filters sort of like this, a geographic layout, a list. And then we work with the team to figure out what data is there, how comfortable people are with it. As I said, there have been cases where we've taken the actual ratings out and put in multi-zips. I know that's probably painful to some of you, but it happens, and if it creates more clarity and alleviates debate and contention, it could be a good thing. So the next steps can go in a number of places. We typically, it could be a column in the list here. I mean, this list can have a whole bunch of additional columns scrolled off to the right. This demo doesn't, but you could have next steps in here. This is a flexible format, so the pages are basically, when you put one of these together, the pages are palettes. They're the workflow. So you could add a next steps page, and coming out of the prospect table is generally where those things are. You can have the text field of what the next steps are. If it's text and if it's grouped into index next steps, that could be there as well. So yeah, that's something that we would typically tile in if it fit a need and the information was in the CRM system in some systematic way. And much like this prospect list, I mean, this is a fairly straightforward one. Often on the right off the screen we'd have contact information. So the goal here is to give the field officer a list they can drop to Excel and work with without having to go back into the CRM system. How much data about individual prospects can be seen on the map screen? Yeah, great question. So our layout here is these pillars are here set to show how many prospects there are in a city. So, at the country level, plotting at the city level works. If you plotted the zip code level at a country, it's too dense. In a metro area, you could use zip code, but whatever. So we're trying to show magnitude here, and we're also coloring. So we've got the color scale here is showing a bunch of things. The color is time since they've last been contacted. So red is no contact record, and these hotter yellow and orange colors are over a year, and the bluer colors are, they've been contacted more recently. So trying to give some clues as to what's going on with contacts and how many there are, and give the person a chance to select. The brush up can have information on what is within the pillar, but here the pillar is a bunch of people. So the people information, or the prospect information, we usually title on a list on the page. So I selected whatever this is, Denver, and there's the brushed up says there's 2 people. The list over here has the 2 people, which is also linked to this list. So this list has more detail on the 2 people. So we are trying to balance with the maps the ability to show a layout information in a way that's selectable, and then have the detail available nearby. To the extent that the pillars are a monolithic thing, you could put like a bunch of content in the brush up, but literally here there's 2 people who have a variety of different characteristics. It'd be a terrible brush up if you put too much in it. So we prefer to have it select. And back to here's whatever this is. Looks like St. Louis, Kansas City. Here's the person in Kansas City. Here's the details on them. It's click to another page to get whatever detail you want. And similarly, the filters page is going to see the coloring is for that person in Kansas City. Can drop in no contact record. So these just drop to that one person. Kind of a boring bar charts, but that's it. What you got at that point. Another good question. Where can we get more detailed maps? Okay, great question. So our maps, we have all kinds of maps. What we're doing with field officers is locking the maps down so that they're not trying to stick maps in. Again, this is for a group that is trying to get a list. So we set maps for them, and you can have that maps of whatever. Here, I guess whoever set this up, they put a U.S. map in. If I brought everybody in, it'd be across the country, and then there's a big population around New York, so we have 2 maps in here. Our maps are, we're next version of our product. The maps will drill down. So if I grab Chicago, drop to that, it'll drop it just so this big U.S. map would drop to the Chicago area and be a blow up of Chicago. So that's where we're going with maps. An author versus a field officer consumer, which is me as Gretchen. An author can pop in any maps. We all, in our tool, in my real business, not as Gretchen, I'm going to like Charleston in a couple weeks, so I can bring up a map of Charleston, see where the roads are, and I'm going to try to get something within easy drive. I can just like literally, take these rectangles and circle the roads. I can grab this, and I can go up here and add in, whatever. So I can get my population exactly the way I want it and get the list I want. So different depends who the user is, but again, for the field office, we're trying to restrict options. I think that's important, and give them what they need. Make it simple. Don't overwhelm them. Great question, Matt. There's a question about data. Where does the data come from? So the data for this is coming from, let me do something else if I'm going to talk about data. I'm going to drop into a PowerPoint. Not this one. Give me a second. So the question is, where does our data come from? Bring up this chart. Nice hand-drawn chart, but it's a data map. Slideshow from here. So we load and blend data from multiple sources. So we're advisor, and there's other tools that do this too. We're a front-level data mart to the CRM system. So the core system in this case would be Razor's Edge or Blackbaud CRM or Advanced or Agilon or something like that. And then there's other, we call it other stuff, or some have called it the dark data. It's not actually in the core system. It could be event attendance and spreadsheets. It could be newsletter click-throughs that drop down as a CSV file from wherever. Reunion surveys, which we can parse stuff out of text, and we're working with social media, but we've not seen anybody do a great job with that yet, my editorial on that. So the concept of what we do with data is an entity table, and it's got stuff in it, biographical, geographical, wealth scores usually in it, class year, affiliation. And by the way, if we're working in healthcare, we also will have patient encounters. So it'll be the core advancement CRM system, and in that world there's also a patient encounter system which has departments and providers and numbers of encounters and all that. It's a similar concept where we're taking tables and say it's employment. So the employment table is a list of all the jobs about for all your prospects, and it's a one-to-many. It may be multiple employment records for each entity. Well, by itself, it's helpful if you're down at a person or two, if you want to grab J.P. Morgan and see who works there. But if you're actually looking at attachment or trying to set an ask level, you might want to know, does the person have a C-level job or what's their field of work? So we can load the employment table, match out on title strings, and then put a flag, copy it back to the entity table. So now you have, does the person have a C-level job? Same thing with degrees. At some point, looking at all the degrees is great, but at some point you want to just know who's got advanced degrees, who's got an MBA, because that's an issue, indication of maybe higher earnings capacity. Similarly with giving, the giving table comes in as a list of gifts. We can do a calculation in the entity table to look at the giving table and figure out how many of the last 5 years has that person made a gift over 20 bucks. And then the number comes back, 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So we're pulling data from a variety of sources, and when we load, this is Razor's Edge, it's usually SQL Server. We might load 50 or 100 tables because sometimes you've got, description tables that are separate from these which have codes, all of that. We might then also load a bunch of other sources, and to us it all comes into our app in one pool of data. We then do all these calculations, and then those charts you saw are working off a pool that looks like this. And generally we load every day. We can load on demand, we can load every hour, but this data isn't that dynamic. And if we load after the backup window at 3 in the morning, we might load the entire thing in 10 or 15 minutes. If we try that at 11 in the morning, it might take 90 minutes because the database is busy and all that. So we're generally sweeping all this stuff in once a day, putting a file on-premise. It can also be in the cloud. Most of our clients run on-premise. And then the apps, like I was running, the dashboards are just running, opening these project files that have preloaded the data, and then give you that visual experience. And the triangle at the beginning would be kind of an example of a layout of a whole set of templates that we do or separate projects that we do. Would take this data and then manifest it in different ways. So, yeah, if you look at this layout here, there are other ways of doing this. I know a number of you have put in data warehouses. You can put charting tools on that, reporting tools on it. We're a data discovery and analysis tool that can go in front of that. If there's a data warehouse, it helps us because some of these calculations may be done there. We still want some of the detail in the source tables because at some point you probably want to see giving trends over time and all that. We actually need the transactions. So if there's a warehouse, yeah, it helps us. We still probably want some of the other tables. If there's not a warehouse, and many of our clients don't, Razor's Edge might be 140, 150 tables. Fine, we're comfortable with that. We do all the calculations and basically end up with this light footprint MART that we run, where you get the experiences like we just talked about. Yeah, that's a sort of a dive into the technical side of this. There's a question about how many of your clients are using something like this with field officers. That's another good question. I'm going to go back in here to this thing. So we do a lot of different things. Field officers is one of the things we do, and is what we largely talked about today. Most of our clients, probably since we're data analytics focused, probably start with prospect research and prospect identification. Get the data in, we create the metrics like on the last page. We may then progress and work on annual giving, which is similar to this because it's got the people, but we need to add in the appeal sends table and all the results from that. And then it's not that hard at that point to take one of these projects and subset it down for the field officers because we've already calculated the metrics for attachment. We've calculated the metrics out of the context table for how long since somebody's been visited. And you're basically simplifying one of these down to this. So our clients run from one project. I think one of them has 52 projects because they've created a bunch of these things and created focus projects for a bunch of their different cohorts and schools. I think overall, I don't know, a third, 40% of our clients push out to the frontline field officers with something like I talked about. Usually it's a second step after they get one of these others going and they say, hey, this is cool, and we've got these metrics, we know what the field officers want, let's push it out. And I did, just to reinforce again, we are trying to be really careful about the richness of what goes to the field officers, and it's balancing simplicity versus richness, because the prospect research team wants something a lot richer. You saw the one where I went in more detail on the attachment scores. That was like maybe 10 pages versus the 3 pages for the field officers. In reality, for prospect research, that could be 20 pages, because you'd want a page on activities, a page on employment, a page on degrees, just a lot more content than the field officers. So the concept, and we talked about this in a couple of those additional webinars, like creating the culture of analytics. The tendency is to create like everything in one of these, and that's a bad idea, whether it's a report or a dashboard or whatever it is. You're much better off creating focused projects or reports for focus groups who have specific needs and ability to consume information. You get a lot more traction and uptake that way. So that's sort of a great question. And I think that on the field officers, just another point on that, we've had some clients who don't want the field officers doing much at all with data. Philosophically, they want them connecting with prospects and not fiddling with computers. But I would argue that their ability to get the list and see who's in the list is pretty paramount to their job. And if you're creating the kind of complexity, let's go back to the situation we saw and how Ithaca solved it. With this situation, why do you want this? Why do you want this huge surge of custom report requests for something that can be self-service? When somebody says that, I would ask the question, is this what you really want? Do you want your team tied up doing this when they could be doing this? And do you want the field officers asking these questions, getting hung in this delay before they get the list, and then maybe not even getting the list they want, or you want most of them, again, not all of them, being able to do this on their own? So just from my perspective, the results here, when you get the field officers using it, are so profound. It's hard to say, how can you say no to this? That's my request. That's my point. Good question. Long answer. Clear through a lot of questions here. Looks like the palette may be clear. So we've recorded this. We are going to have it up on our website, within certainly the week. If more questions come in, you know how to reach me. Just email me. Whoops, not too far. Email me, call me, check out our webinars. We've got handouts with all these things. All these things are free. This one will be up there soon. And I wish you all good luck with your data and making it simple to use for your field officers, so you no longer have them driving you crazy with custom report requests, which is back to the original title. So thanks, I appreciate it, and have a great rest of the day.